Okay, here's another issue, issue 4, climate change. Eleanor, the climate change issue is one that has a lot of salience, especially with younger Americans, people around the world, but with the president's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord, where do you see us now?
Well, when we did our year-end shows and we had a number of predictions, I singled out the planet as a winner because finally climate change was being taken seriously. Planet is a winner in the sense that people are talking about it, but we're losing the race against time if people really don't perform. So I think climate change is a major issue for the Democrats, and they all basically agree. So it's not a point of contention, but it is a rallying point for young voters. And young voters are, by more than 60%, Democrats. And climate change is one of the issues that's putting them in that column. So I think President Trump is doing a disservice to his party by pretending he's the stork and putting his head under the sand. Is it the stork? Do I have the wrong? Ostrich. I figured I had the wrong bird.
They're both birds. It's okay.
Oh, it's all birds. Okay, and it will emerge in the presidential debates in the fall between the Democrat and the president, and I just don't see that as a winning issue anymore. There's what's happened in Australia has really
not a winning issue for Trump, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, right.
It has really woken that country, which has been a climate denier, and the head of the natural gas or the head of the fossil fuel association in Australia, which is the biggest coal exporter in the world, has gone over to the other side, and they're basically understanding that they're losing the fight there, and they've got to mobilize very quickly. And so I think, people are noticing that. It's not just the fires in California; it's the destruction in Australia. I think has been really eye-opening.
And of course, a lot of issues for the Australian Prime Minister there politically. Jim, one of the challenges, though, for Democrats is that Republicans would perhaps point to the reduced marginal cost of conventional energy, the fossil fuel economy. We see that in President Trump in terms of West Virginia, successful campaigning, etc. How much, though, do you think Eleanor is onto something in terms of the evolution in the political discourse here, at least on the part of voters?
I think there's no question that voters have moved left on environmental issues, but they haven't been made to bear any costs associated with taking that position. And I think that's really where the rubber meets the road. So, you have the carbon tax pass in France. There's widespread middle class opposition to that. It was politically disadvantageous to Macron. You're having demonstrations in the streets. I think when you look at places like West Virginia that were safely Democratic as recently as under Bill Clinton, are now reliably Republican, there is a resistance to bearing the burden of some of the environmental policy changes that actually do poll very well in the abstract.
Well, when you look at some of the forces that are coming into the conversation as it relates to climate change, and I agree that the younger aspect of the electorate is certainly something that is a dynamic. I think one of the things that we'll recall as a change in 2020 has really been the entry of corporate America. Microsoft really came out with some pretty big news on a fundamental business shift this year when it announced that it's going to be pursuing a broad policy that within the next 10 years they're going to effectuate a carbon negative footprint. And that was really a lot of leadership in the boardroom. And it really is going to have a deep impact because they're going to be not only requiring those elements within their own office, but with their joint venture partners and their subcontractors as well.
And to your point there, we would probably suspect that part of the motivation there was not wholly morally vested, that actually protecting the customer base, saying, listen, you can go and buy our expensive products because you can believe in us. Also important.
Oh, it's great business. It's great business. And BlackRock, which is one of the most sophisticated buying institutions, has also said that they want to go into a more carbon-friendly footprint. And as you say, and I completely agree, it is business-friendly. Green technology is going to be making a big play this year and next. So it's going to be something that's going to be adding to the conversation.
And yet, Clarence, green technology still requires pretty big government subsidies to be functional. And we still see as well. You know, to President Trump would say that, okay, why should we be doing this in the Paris Accord with China only committing to try and do something starting in 2030? I mean,
President Trump hasn't read the accords and all. He doesn't understand. I mean, this was a big moment, a big negotiating point with the Chinese, and they said, "Hey, you're already around the track. We're just getting started. You're telling us to suddenly handicap ourselves." So they worked out a deal whereby they could still keep polluting, but on a graduating scale. That's what negotiations are about, as President Trump is supposed to know. But he also recently, though, I noticed he acknowledged that there is a climate change happening. He just questions now whether it is man-made or human effectuated, as they say in Washington. Whereas before he had the hardliner policy, I saw the same evolution occur in the Bush years as well. So maybe there's hope over there in Oval Office.
Well, if you don't believe it's man-made, just try to imagine if the Chinese society keeps evolving into a bigger middle class and they all get cars and refrigerators and air conditions. How is that going to? It's happening, exactly. So I think the answer that it's man-made is pretty obvious. But you can't promote it as public policy by telling everybody this is going to hurt you economically. You have to present it as new industries that are emerging, and all the people who used to work in the coal mines maybe can find jobs with solar panels. The West Virginia's coal mine industry is not coming back. There are new industries waiting to be born here, and I think the right kind of politician can frame this in a way that people see it as a challenge. You know, let's go to the moon together. Let's save the planet together.
And the business opportunities for all of these communities are definitely there. If you look at somebody like Elon Musk, who's not without controversy, but he's created a lot of jobs. When you're talking about battery technology and the evolution of different kinds of modes of accelerated recharging, those are the sorts of things that can really make a fundamental change in certain areas of the country that really is something that I think President Trump could probably get a good deal of traction out of, because that's where the new economy is headed, and that's even aside from the elevation of the stock market and what those kinds of investments can propose in terms of the opportunities.
And one thing about President Trump, he can flip on an issue pretty easily. He's now claiming he's not going to touch Social Security at all because he realizes that's third rail politics. And if the numbers continue to grow of people wanting some government action on climate change, I can imagine him finding a escape hatch in the fall if it becomes an election issue.
And Jim, one of the interesting things, I mean, going back to that previous issue we were talking about, if we can see objects that are capable of traveling across the Atlantic far speedier speeds than jet propulsion objects without any pollution, there's a good thing there. Anyway, I'm over-obsessing on that issue. One of the things, one of my brothers, Andrew Rogan, you know, I'm very proud of him. He's a marine biologist, and one of the things he always says is, you know, climate change, urgent issue, as with Eleanor, the number one issue, but you've got to sell it. And why he gets very frustrated with people when they say, you can't eat meat anymore. He says, why not focus in terms of ocean things, you know, ocean habitats in terms of whales dying, coral reefs, things, polar bears unable to survive, things that have saliency for people immediately, and you can draw a connection point. I mean, how much of this then is actually, both from the left and the right, about finding a narrative that is more easily politically saleable?
I mean, I think that's true in almost any political debate, any policy debate, is that you have to find a message that works and connects with people. And I think to the degree that environmentalism is viewed as either anti-jobs or just a sort of form of moral hectoring, you know, don't eat meat, don't do that, you know, your straws are now gone. You have to use something that dissolves in the water, dissolves in your coffee. To the extent that it's viewed in that light, it's going to be less effective. To the extent that it's viewed as something futuristic and something forward-looking, it has a much greater potential for success.
I don't like the cardboard straws, but
who does?
If that saves the planet, I'm going for it. I mean, when you look at the amount of plastic in the oceans, it's absolutely sickening. When they open up the stomachs of a young whale and they find nothing but plastic in there. I mean, that's a crime against, I want to say humanity. Yes, it is a crime. Again, that's better.
I've been very surprised, you know, and Tom, you raised a great point about what about the communication. I've been surprised about how difficult it's been to parlay the humanitarian aspect of this. You're talking about, all of this waste that's, causing so much torture to the animals in the ocean, but even to people on land. I mean, it's causing immigration issues. People are starving, and it's difficult to understand why there's an issue with the transmit and receive on that communication, because it's very emotional.
It's happening now. It's not in the distant future.
Exactly.
It's interesting you mentioned that Parley there. There's a organization, Parley for the Oceans, which actually makes high-end fashion wear from plastics and does very well, makes profit. I mean, again, my brother's done some work with them. But, another issue here, though, I do come back to, I do think we have to be tougher on China, not simply in terms of their carbon expulsion, getting them in binding treaty commitments, because the Chinese love to say they'll do things and then not do them, at least under Xi Jinping. And then secondly, the broader issue here with Chinese massive overfishing, the degradation of these global stocks. I mean, I would have a lot more sympathy for a really robust climate deal if the Chinese agreed formally to do something now.
But how can you say they have to do it when this country is not willing to do it?
Well, I'm saying reciprocity.
Yeah.
Fine, but I don't think that's going to happen with the current occupant of the Oval Office.
Okay, well, I suppose we will find out. Jim, concluding comment here, capping things off for us?
I think as long as the fight against climate change is viewed as a fight against affluence and not as something that can produce a newer, more robust economy, you're going to have some political problems with it.
Look at that. Pat Buchanan would be proud of that concluding line. All right, out of time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to join the discussion at McLaughlin.com, where it will continue perpetually. And check out our podcast on iTunes. See you next time.